Gold majority report where you molded your thoughts on TMBS. You would talk that talk, always kind, looking out for the underdog. Fought for workers every day, punching the card. You a star legend, an icon for us. We gonna fight for what's just. You keep the light on us, from flesh to stardust. We blessed to know you, dude. Every day you served us with some good soul food. International, cosmopolitan. You left so abruptly, it's hard to process it. Man, we shook as ever. P.S. Thanks for the book. It's Michael Brooks forever.
Guys, stay safe, stay well, be kind to yourselves and others, and also realize that effort starts over each day.
So watch TMBS, chop it up with Cornel West, and I say, man, I'm gonna miss Michael. And yeah, the grief, it stinks. Open your heart and sing. Rest in peace, King.
Hi, everyone. Happy Sunday. It's been a horrible week in the news. I want to just start off by saying, there's just so much grief going on, and people just continue to be losing loved ones, and it's so hard that this violence just continues. And I think that was kind of one of the beautiful things about Michael and his work, is I think he was able to make a lot of people feel a little less alone, a little less scared, a little more optimistic that maybe things could change and get better. So I just want to thank you all for supporting me and continuing to talk about Michael and his work. And hopefully that has a ripple effect and inspires other people to follow in his footsteps. And I'm still holding on, that in the end we win. And by that, I mean optimism wins, compassion wins. I had a rough weekend. A friend of mine, her romantic partner, just his worldview is fundamentally not compassionate. And I realized this weekend, you can debate ideology and structure and change and yada, 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 but you can't really debate compassion. Well, it is Friday, March 19th. I'm recording this, so it will be Sunday when you all hear this. So thank you for being compassionate and loving and supportive of this project, and holding a lot of grief in anyone who's kind of awake to what's happening in the world is definitely having to navigate life with a lot of grief these days. So I'm thinking of all of you as well. So on Thursday or yesterday, we posted on the Patreon about a project that I've been excited to get started. Julia Eccles, a friend and fan of TMBS, had this beautiful idea of creating a travel guide in Michael's honor and memory. So if anyone would like to participate, we'd love for as many members of the legacy community and TMBS community to submit their about their hometown or the place in the world you'd like to show Michael. And all of the prompts and kind of ideas around format are posted on the Patreon, and so is the email you can send in your responses to. So I hope a lot of people enjoy that, and we can kind of put together this Michael Brooks Left International Travel Guide. And please don't feel excluded if you live in the U.S. The U.S. is part of the internationalism as well. All right. Well, for today's show, I interviewed one of the founders of the homeschooling hub that Michael kind of joined. I think he was around age between 12 and 14. I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to check with my parents. So we had a great conversation about kind of young Michael and about homeschooling and public schools and education. So I hope you really enjoy today's show. And yeah, here's my conversation with Ken. Look forward to hearing your all's comments and feedback. And I hope you have a great rest of your Sunday.
Sure. My name is Ken Danford. I'm the co-founder of what is now called North Star Self-Directed Learning for Teens. And back in the day of 1996, 97 was called Pathfinder Center in Amherst, Massachusetts. It is an alternative to school. We coach families to use homeschooling as a means to create their own learning programs. We have a little center where people can gather. There's much more to it. 25 years later, I'm still running the project, and there's a lot of other centers modeled after North Star now, and it's still my life. But we started, we being my friend Joshua Hornick and I, back in 1996, with a group of about 25 kids. Among our first members was Michael Brooks. He would have been about 12 or 13 years old at the time. Yep. He was a member for 2 years during his junior high school time. Instead of going to middle school, he hung out with us for 2 years. And we had quite an experience together. And then he chose to go to high school and on to Bennington, and people know the rest of his story. It's extraordinary. So I can report back from Michael when he was about 12 or 13 years old. I think that's what I'm here to do.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for doing this. I guess kind of where I wanted to start was, it was the very beginning of, then Pathfinders, now North Star. What was it like in the early days? Kind of what was like the mission? What was the structure? What was like a day like?
Yeah, this is a good story. This was the revolution. So Joshua Hornick and I were teachers who had gone to school and become teachers in grad school. We were, working our way up the, inside the public school to reform things and make things better for more kids inside the school. I was in a doctorate program at UMass at the time, become a superintendent and secretary of education. And we were disillusioned with the way schools operate and how coercive things are and how oppressive we were being to kids, even if we didn't want to be. And Joshua knew about unschooling and homeschooling, and he gave me a book by Grace Llewellyn, the Teenage Liberation Handbook, How to Quit School and Get a Real Life Education. And we decided that what we should do is quit our jobs and help everybody use this unschooling lifestyle instead of going to regular school. And we figured that what most kids in public school needed, and private school for that matter, to opt out of schooling and to embrace unschooling, homeschooling as a teenager, would be a headquarters, a physical place to gather. So we quit our jobs. We rented an office in downtown Amherst, a dingy basement.
It's a basement. Yeah, I remember.
The basement. It was like the crash pad. It was a low ceiling, musty. I'm telling you, this was the revolution. And we were coaching school kids to quit going to school, and we'll help you file the homeschooling papers, and we'll have fun out here, and we'll show them, and you'll grow up and you'll go to whatever you want to do, like Bennington, and we'll have more fun in the meantime, and we're going to treat you with respect and dignity, and we're not going to have to tell you what to do, and you can come and go as you please, and we trust you and you trust us, and if we're useful, we'll do stuff together. And so we had this little dingy basement center called Pathfinder Center. We were there for 6 years, and now 25 years later, we own a big building in Sunderland with beautiful light and yard, and it's all good now. But and so we didn't know what we were doing when we quit our jobs, nor were there were no, like, we didn't plan to attract existing homeschoolers. There weren't very many of them, and they didn't need us or want us. They'd already figured it out. But we knew from teaching that loads of kids were going to school miserably every day, especially in the junior high and high school years. We were teaching in the junior high in Amherst at the time. And Michael wasn't there. Michael was at a different school, I believe.
He wasn't at school. He had homeschooled always, and he had one disastrous year at public school in the Northfield public school, and he had kind of did well academically, then got bored, and then it all sort of escalated around the time he pulled the fire alarm in the hall, because, as he said, he could, it was there to pull. And after that, he never went back. And then Pathfinders North Star was the next stop. So I wanted to ask you, when he came in,
yes,
what like was he reading okay? Could he do any math? Like, what was his
he was definitely reading okay.
Yeah,
I mean, he was totally in on things. He we did current events and history together. He participated in all kinds of hands-on things. Our Bake-a-thon, the thing you're thinking of at the Common House that you probably went to when you were 5. He was terrific. We argued a lot. He was very verbal. He was certainly verbally precocious, right? And
always.
Wise. But he was very informed. However, he got his information. I don't think he got it all from listening. I think he got a lot of his information from reading things he wanted to read. Writing output, I don't really recall. I mean, we didn't make kids write. We still don't make kids. I read what kids write if they want to, but I don't make them write. So I don't always know people's writing skills. I wouldn't necessarily sign off that Michael was a writer at 13 or 12. I doubt it. But he was certainly informed and certainly, well thought out. And we would do, like at North Star, there was a common room where you just hang out and people would be doing the Boston Globe crossword puzzle every day out loud, and he would participate. Or, like for one of my history classes, I'm sure, I don't know if this was with him, but it may well have been with him. We went down to the mall to look at where all the clothes were being made and, figure out, because we're looking at child labor and international clothing issues and stuff. I mean, intellectually, he was 100%, with it and there. I don't know how, what his output skill was other than verbal output, which was very strong.
Right.
Yeah. And, he never pulled fire alarms on us.
So you mentioned, you said it was the revolution, and you've talked about going to the mall and talking about child labor. Did you and Josh have a sort of like political ideology? I mean, the kind of rebelling against school, like what was there? Obviously, Michael went on and was sort of always very politically aware, and that was a huge part of his identity and his, work. Was there a strong political theme at North Shore?
Well, I mean, we live in Western Massachusetts, which is a pretty, a liberal lefty place.
Yeah.
But we have pretty fastidiously separated our personal politics from North Star. Mm-hmm. It doesn't get us very far to insist that everybody at North Star be people who agree with us, or that all of our content match what our politics is. And so we've had families who are independent, families who are Republican, families who are libertarian, who choose to use North Star or Pathfinder to help them have an alternative to school. They don't, someone like Michael, let's get back to him, for example, though after Northfield, 11, 12, 13 years old, doesn't want to go to junior high, but independent homeschooling is not a barrel of apple. Interesting or amusing. He and your parents are like trying, but you need more stuff, and how much is there, and how are you going to do it? And most homeschoolers across the country still today, and certainly back then, most homeschoolers stopped homeschooling at age 12, 13, 14 to go to high school because of fear about college and prep and science labs, and also desire for romance and, the allure of prom and all the, school stuff, sports or whatever. And so homeschooling is mostly a young kid's phenomenon. And when you outgrow it and you want to stay homeschooling because you don't really want to do the junior high or high school, there's thin pickings for social life and activities, and North Star really fit the bill. Michael was exactly who we were looking for, and we were what Michael wanted at that time. And the kind of little clubhouse support program that one would need, a place to go, a community of 30, 40 kids, a couple of nice adults who aren't your parents. You just hang out, you have classes, you can have tutorials and one-on-ones. Someone's meeting with you weekly to sort of discuss how things are going in your life. But no one's making you do anything. There's no requirements. There's no grades. There's no credits or credentials, because it's a homeschooling world. These kids are legally homeschoolers. We're not covering school for them. We're not technically a school. And so we didn't have to get Michael to do anything other than, don't pull fire alarms, which he already wasn't doing. So, Michael, lively, sparkly, he was twinkly, mischievous a little bit. But, not in any, I was not in any hard way. I was teaching 8th grade for the years before then, for a number of years. My days were miserable as a school teacher trying to get kids to sit down and shut up in my class. With Michael, it'd be just like, yo, stand up then, twirl around while we talk. I don't care. You don't have to sit down, and you can interrupt, the things that made school impossible for him at that age just didn't matter so much, as long as he was, reasonably polite to the other members in a group setting, right? Which he always was. So, we've always had a number of kids like Michael who just, you don't want to sit still when you're 12. You're going to school is just miserable, right? I wouldn't say that, Michael's unique in his precocious political awareness and, vitality. He was unique then and he remains unique, so.
Do you remember kind of like what, I know it was already a really long time ago and he wasn't the only kid, but do you kind of remember what his days were like, what he sort of would do on a typical day with you guys?
He would come in. I don't think he came in at the crack of dawn. I don't think he was an early morning kid.
Probably not.
He'd show up. Hello, did you see this in the news? What about this or that? I mean, he was himself already, in that way. He'd come into a history class or current events thing or whatever activity that he wanted to do that was pre-scheduled, or else he'd just sit in the common room and see who was there. And then he'd be like, hey, let's go for a walk up to the library or the bookstore. Let's go get a donut or whatever they were going to do. And, find someone to, amuse himself with. And either he'd sit around and, in our space and interact with people playing games or talking, or he'd get someone to go for a walk with him. And, pretty socially oriented things in a pretty normal sort of way. I mean, if you just think of an after school program and move it to a daytime instead of school program, how Michael would have behaved at a summer camp or, a place where he had a lot of flexibility to make his own choices and not get in trouble for being late or, didn't have to do a structured set of things, or there were things were offered to him. You can picture it. He was a good, lively character.
Yeah.
I mean, that's most of what I remember about him, is his lively characterness. I don't really, the specifics of what we actually did together. I don't know if we played Uno or if we, went to the library. I don't know. I mean, granted, it is 25 years ago. I mean,
no, I know. Did he, obviously I remember he was always just so confident in his intellect from a very young age. You mentioned there was kind of a diverse group of kids. I assume it's always been this way with different political backgrounds. Was he ever like really argumentative or like brutal on other kids' leanings or kind of worldviews?
Yeah, you can rephrase that question to be like, was he ever not? Of course he was. In a Michael Brooks kind of, nice kind. I mean, he wasn't mean. He wasn't a bully.
Yeah, you're just kind of like,
but sure he was. Of course he was out, pointed. And when I would have a current events class or a history class, he'd be, he wouldn't hesitate to state his viewpoint. And if people said something that were opposed, he'd let them know. Yeah, sure he would.
What was the other thing I was going to ask you about young Michael? Oh, what was he really funny? Do you remember him like having humor at the time, or was he more serious? Because I remember him a little more serious at that age.
That's a good question. I think he was trying really hard to be socially, like all of us in middle school. I mean, if you think the Michael Brooks, so he wanted to be liked, he wanted to be included, right, and he wanted to be part of the community. And so he would, the humor was to make people laugh and to like him, not to be hostile or mean. And I think his goals, and more so than at other times of his life, probably, just like for me, and I don't know for everybody else who's listening, but when you're in that middle school era, wanting to be liked and included is pretty, you might prioritize that over other moments in one's life, right? So I suspect Michael became more confident and less concerned about whether everybody was liking what he had to say or thought he was funny or not as he grew older. Mm-hmm. So I would say in the era that I had him, I thought he was pretty funny. He was pretty witty.
Yeah.
But witty in a desire to be liked. Mm. Yeah.
What did you think he was gonna do? Like, where did you see him ending up at, work wise and career wise?
Oh boy, I probably didn't speculate too much. Somewhere in the political vein, makes sense. I think I was with him at a phase prior to maturing where it's like hard to know. I mean, this kid, sure, he wants to he has lots of thoughts. He has a lot of information. He doesn't sit still so much he's kind of smiley and witty, but let's see when like, to be a radio host, a television host as he was, one has to sit still.
But he wouldn't sit still. He was constantly moving.
I don't picture him sitting still very long.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, he's 12, 13 years old. I mean, let's be, time relevant. Like, so I don't think I had deep expectations at that point, other than, he'll be doing something good for the world for sure. How it's going to play out, I don't know, because let's see what happens to him. I remember he went on to high school. He only stayed with us 2 years, chose to go to high school in a program that suited him, which I thought was terrific. And then it remains a terrific program. And then he got into Bennington. I remember that.
Yeah,
and was. Michael does write. Okay, he got it right. And then next thing you know, you got professional on us, right? So
yeah. So I wanted to ask you a couple other questions. Do you have more time?
Of course. Sure.
Okay. So one was kind of around the time he was at Pathfinders, sort of towards the tail end, he got involved with some kids that were like kind of involved in like a bit of a criminal scene in Amherst. Were you aware of that at all, or not really?
No, it's not entirely shocking, but I would assume that probably had to do with pot, but I don't know. No.
Yeah. No, he just kind of ended up hanging. I think he was kind of drawn towards like these kids that had a little bit more. I think he was sort of fascinated by their lives and kind of curious socially. And I didn't know if you guys were aware of that. He ended up being kind of he wasn't a witness, but he knew a kid that was attacked, and he ended up, he got really scared, I think, at that point, and they had like threatened me, and then he kind of just stopped hanging out with those kids. He stopped really smoking. I mean, he smoked weed, but he stopped doing drugs, and he got really serious about meditation. That was all very self-directed. And when he went to PVPA to do oh God, what was it? Lone Tree?
Oh, yeah, something like that. Right. As the program for homeschoolers to welcome their way into PVPA.
Yeah. And for those of you listening, PVPA was a charter public performing arts school where Michael and I grew up, and we both went there. But you might find this interesting. He actually didn't really have the right transcript together to get into college. And he decided to reframe himself again as a homeschooler when he applied to Bennington. And from Bennington, he actually went on to Bates because Bennington was not as academically vigorous or, kind of had the type of international programs he wanted to focus on. So at what point did you become aware of what Michael was doing kind of more publicly?
Oh, I would say before the Majority Report, there was something else that he was doing that I was aware of, but I can't remember.
Maybe
what
the Pac-Man show he was on.
And did he have his own show at something, or
he did a bunch of stuff? I don't remember. There was, he was having little appearances here and there, but he didn't. I don't remember him consistently having his own show before the Majority Report.
So somewhere, what year would he have graduated from Bates? 2000, like 5 or 8 or something.
Yeah, somewhere in there. I don't know if he took a year off here and there.
Yeah. So there was a moment where I would have, not been in regular touch with him. And then, from like 2015 on, as alumni, I made a concerted effort to start being in touch with alumni and find out whatever happened to them all. And I feel like I had something to work with Michael on him, and I knew he was with the Majority Report when I reached out to him. And I don't know when that started, but I knew he was there. And I have other friends who are politically involved in DC. And so, like, I don't know, I feel like I was aware distantly of his activities, but more actively in the last 7, 8, 10 years. I don't know, something like that.
Okay. And are there other people who Michael was like at I keep on saying Pathfinders, North Star, whichever, that did anything at all similar, or had, was there at all like a theme of what any of his contemporaries went on to do with their lives?
Oh, sure. Some have gone on to become professors. Others have gone on to become circus performers, musicians. We have several professional musicians, computer programmers. I mean, like, I wouldn't necessarily say they all went into politics, but in terms of like not doing junior high and high school, one became a superintendent of local public school
Oh,
here.
wow.
So the answer is yeah. That when we look at there's out of his cohort, there's someone who's a librarian, someone who was working for the Metropolitan Opera in New York. Like, yes, I mean, like these were quality kids who went on to quality lives, and not going to junior or high school wasn't a thing. It wasn't an impediment at all. It was a release. It was a relief.
Yeah.
And I ended up writing a book not too long ago. And the subtitle of the book is The North Star Approach to a Head Start on Life. And clearly, skipping junior high and high school can be a head start on life. For most kids, for that to be true, having a center like North Star, having some adults who aren't your parents, having a little community matters. So I'm not necessarily for isolated online learning at home alone, homeschooling as a replacement for a community. But with a community, opting out of high school is a great head start for kids who want to do it. And Michael certainly made it. Well, Michael made it so for the couple of years. Then he chose, he was always in high school on his own volition. Others, he's not alone in that either. We've had, a substantial number of kids who have chosen to use North Star in the junior high years and then go to a high school, whether it's PVPA or a different charter or the Voc Tech or just a regular standard public or private high school. Loads of kids just want a year or two out of school during those years, and it turns out to be a very positive thing. I have a whole article about that too. So Michael was a pioneer. Like we were learning together. Like we had the intellectual concept and read some book. Like homeschooling's a thing, unschooling's a thing. You don't have to go to high school. That's true. Here are some examples, but we didn't have our own examples, right? So Michael was a pioneer with us of that first band of, that first 5-6 years of kids. I'm into year 25 now, year 26 this year. We figured it out together, and then they became our stories. And so, but Michael was with a solid set of kids who thrived without school for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the social, because I obviously there's millions of reasons why I miss Michael and wish he was here, but it would be so curious to hear him talk about this, because I think that was the thing that was the most challenging and painful about his early experience with homeschooling. Because I think you're right, in terms of freedom and flexibility and not having to sit all day, I think Michael would have been bored in a lot of classroom settings. But I think he felt a lot of isolation and lack of, social activity as a young person. And that was, I think, the most challenging. So it was just interesting to hear you comment on how significant community is. Because I think in my mind, it kind of was like, okay, Michael had a sort of negative experience with early homeschooling. And then I had fairly positive experiences with alternative school. I was able to go to the Waldorf school. They wouldn't have Michael at the Waldorf school. He was already too, rambunctious and not in line with the German,
No, that would have been a mess.
It depended on the teacher, honestly. It's so for those of you who are listening who aren't familiar, when you go to a Waldorf education, you usually have the same teacher for 8 years, or for, first through fourth, and then fourth through eighth, or 1 through 8. And every teacher is so different. So there could have been a match for Michael, but the year he was applying to go in was not a match. I don't remember who the person was, but they already were terrified of Michael's rambunctiousness. And then I went on to PVPA, and again, I was able to take time off to do things, there was flexibility. If you were, doing a play or booked a job, you could go do something. We had Paideia, which was a chunk of time in the winter. That was essentially how you run your program. And I also graduated maybe a year early or semester early. And there was just flexibility there. So I didn't have a typical education either, but I feel like the biggest, difference in Michael and I's childhood was the social and the access to, a social life and his feeling of isolation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's real. I think that's really, that's, why we do what we do. I don't think that homeschooling is that easily sustained or appealing to people, without some coherent community center or program. Like, so I relish having it be not a school where they don't have to come every day, where they can come and go as they please, where it's
Yeah.
more open than what a private school would have to be. But there's still a role for what we're doing. That's, I think, is essential.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was terrified of standardized testing and so scared. I didn't, I remember going to my picture yourself at PVPA day because there wasn't testing at the Waldorf school. And I just thought oh, there's no way I'll pass these tests. I won't be able to pass the test and then I won't be able to move on with my life. And then I've talked about this publicly before. I was a great cheat. And also the teachers there didn't really care about the standardized test. And even if they caught me cheating, I don't know if they necessarily would have cared because I think they thought the whole thing was bunk. And I was just I'm not going to pass this math section. I have to pass it to, it was this huge anxiety. And now I look back and I'm like, who cares about the MCAS?
Right.
What, I don't even remember anything about what was on that test. And obviously now it's been proven it's, classist and racist and sexist, and there's all this study around it. But I had tremendous test anxiety, so even just the ability of alleviating young people from the testing is it must be a huge relief for a lot of kids that come your way.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah
The whole regimen, the whole 5 or 6 hours a day every day within the homework, and then do this for 12 years.
Do you think the testing, we're going to move away from the testing as a country, or do you think just the taxation and testing, is forever entrenched and it's kind of here to stay?
I'm not particularly optimistic about public school reform. Public schools are the way they are for a lot of reasons. If I thought I could have reformed them, I would not have quit my job to start Pathfinder North Star. I would have stayed in the system to reform it. So I'm a cynic. I'm a little jaded. You might want a little more optimism than I'm giving you. I mean, there is an anti-testing movement now.
Yeah.
The college admissions people moving away from SATs is happening. There's a lot of, no test schools, and that's helpful. I don't know if public schools can, if states can move away from the state systems that they've created for themselves now. So I choose to help people just abandon ship. Because it's really healthier out here. Just opt out. Don't opt out of testing. Opt out of schooling. That's what I do.
Do you think that why don't opt out of testing? Opt out of schooling? You're saying do both?
Or do both? Absolutely.
Okay.
When you opt out of school,
you opt out.
Private schools, homeschoolers don't have to take the test. So
right.
But just staying in, just opt out of the whole thing.
So for people that's just completely not, this year has been a year from hell. Teaching the kid at home, there's no infrastructure in their community. This, it's everyone throws the word privilege around now a lot, but there is a certain amount of a lot of people that's just not a reality. Are there any pointers for people who are listening to this and want to maybe try and get involved with public school reform, because that's kind of the only option? There isn't a North Star, or are there any ways to create homeschooling programs that are adjacent to public schools that what are resources for people who are curious about this but don't live in Western Massachusetts?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that, if you need to use your public schools, go ahead and try to find a niche, one program, one teacher, one corner of the universe. And I say this to people who are teaching unhappily in the system too, and need to earn the income and can't afford to leave. Try to find a corner that's, more elective and more choice and more, happy, so you're happy to go to school every day, either as a worker or as a student. And it's possible. I mean, I liked going to school as a kid. That's why I became a teacher. Right. So, I know school can be enjoyable for a lot of kids.
Yeah.
But I really didn't enjoy teaching as a profession when I was expected to tell kids to sit down and do what I had, or else threaten them. North Star, we have this policy of welcoming all families. We've turned nobody away ever for money or for being a hard case or bad behavior in schooling. So, we make, our slogan is yesterday was your last day of school, don't go to school anymore. And I do think it takes a little center. And the upside of it is, kids who are miserable in school are often very good at things outside of school. They may be good at sports or after school programs or youth groups or other places. And if kids are good with their families and good with people and good with life, they're just bad at school, then just stop going to school. Stop going to the place that makes you crazy. And to do that, homeschooling doesn't have to be school at home taught by one's parents. We assume that's what it means, but it's not. That's not at all what, and especially with the older you get. So there's a lot of ways, and once you investigate it, you can figure that out. And if you can find a way to deal with the childcare side of things so that your children are safe, learning is like the least of it. Your kids will learn. And there's a lot of ways for people to learn. Just think how kids learn how to use computers and cell phones. It's not from schools. Kids learn how to use things, or how do kids learn how to cook or fend for themselves in other ways. We learn a lot of skills and we learn a lot of things without being taught them directly by school teachers in school. But you do need to have your kids safe. If adults are working and they need to go to work, you can't just leave your kids home alone all day and feel good about it. It's just not healthy for anybody. It's not wise, it's not safe, it's not a functional thing. But if you can band together in any sort of way with any group, in any kind of homeschooling, unschooling co-op, or otherwise there's some kind of alternative, more self-directed kind of school or program anywhere near you, it's worth investigating.
Yeah.
I wish I had a better solution. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at in my career right now, trying to come up with better solutions.
Yeah, the reason I ask, and I know we've kind of deviated from the topic of Michael specifically, but I just think this is something that people listening will have interest in. A lot of the folks who obviously follow Michael's work and now are interested in hearing about his life come from, a socialist or communist background. Is there like, in Ken's dream society of kind of like, would there, do you think, be a shift in our school system if there was a shift towards a more socialized society and there was like less of, we don't need to get into the history of why schools are the way they are and how they prep people for prison and for, factory jobs and blah, blah, blah. But what is like your dream society center school look like?
Well, I have an answer for you. And neatly, I have a book too. This is the book for Learning is Natural, School is Optional, The North Star Approach to Offering Teens a Head Start on Life. And in the end, I do have a section where I say that my ideal would be to keep the public schools as public, available, free programs for everybody. Make them non-compulsory. Give everybody 6 free years to use their junior high and high school facilities. Give teachers a little more creativity over what to name their classes. Instead of 8th grade English, let it be playwriting or something of that ilk. Same across all the other disciplines. Let kids take whatever they want, whether it's only art or only English or only Spanish or all the things. If the kids do a distribution requirement thing, then they get the high school diploma. If they don't get a diploma. They get a printout of what they did do, and they're supposed to go get a GED instead. And so if kids only come for steel drum class, so be it. Schools are a public resource to be used by each teen as they wish. Keep the cafeterias and libraries open all day, and let free roam as long as people behave themselves reasonably and don't interfere with other people's going about their business. And make them into like giant community colleges is basically what I envision, right? I think we need the free public resource. And in that sense I think schools are a great example of socialism. Public schools, they're paid for, they're publicly owned entities, right? And property and whatnot. And theoretically, they're subject to elections and public review, but that's kind of nominal. And so my dream would be that the Amherst Junior High and High School would be open for people to use as they wish from grades 7 through 12 without a lot of stress and bother. Major league community centers, community college type things. And if you do all their classes their way, you'll get the Amherst High School diploma and stamp of approval. And if you don't do things their way, you do the parts that you do like respectfully and cordially, and then you go about the rest of your life and you leave and you don't get their diploma and you get a GED and you go off to Hampshire or Bennington, however you do, or Bates and or UMass, or you don't go to college at all, and you live and be well. That's my how's that for utopia?
You're pitching like all of us optimistic utopian dreamers do, the dream, and then the as long as everyone behaves respectfully and does it. That's always just a little bit of. Do you think if kids,
but
yeah, let me just finish this thought because I think you're probably gonna say the same. Do you think if kids have the freedom, flexibility, respect, dignity to kind of be self-directed, it really cuts down all the kind of behavioral stuff? Because I know, for instance, with Michael, who was so smart, in a lot of ways very self-driven, had like a lot of ambition. He definitely got into some pretty tricky behavioral and went through like a very rocky adolescence, and there wasn't really a disciplinary or there wasn't really an apparatus in his life that kind of helped guide him, and he luckily chose to not become join the gang or you do the initiation or whatever, that he veered in the other direction. But that was simply kind of for whatever reason, his internal compass and whatever was going on for him. I mean, he kind of joked to me. He said, they told me I'd have to put someone in the hospital, and I was tiny little shrimpy kid. I couldn't have done it.
Right. Yeah, that's terrifying. Yeah. And I'm sorry that he was, that close to things or, facing those kinds of choices. That may either happen with me blissfully unaware or after my time with him. I don't know. But one of the things we've changed at North Star over the years since those early years is to be more engaged on a weekly basis with every kid, to be more on top of how they're doing in life. Partly from her, other stories like that where we weren't clued in enough, that we were too passive at first at Pathfinder. But back to your question, when people have the freedom to come and go at will and are respected, they don't misbehave so much.
Sure.
There's no desire to be a nuisance. I didn't really, Michael didn't pull fire alarms at North Star at Pathfinder. He wasn't really a menace. He was immature, but he wasn't a menace. And teens can go to rock concerts in enormous numbers, and they don't necessarily create mayhem. Teens gather at sporting events and don't necessarily create mayhem. When teens are in large numbers, but they want to be there and they don't really want to get kicked out, there's not that much incentive to create mayhem.
Sure.
And, even, at college, college kids who get drunk create mayhem, but not necessarily in the middle of class, not necessarily, on the, in the middle of the day, like they go to parties and act like nitwits. But so I think there's every reason to it. And when you look at the same high school kids who they have part-time jobs, they're on sports teams, they go to, religious youth groups, they have family activities, they behave like normal human beings outside of school, but inside of school, they sabotage and distract and vandalize and just corrupt the process because they feel put upon, right? These same people don't behave that way when they're not feeling oppressed. And so, I'm very optimistic, and I feel like in 26 years, I don't not had loads of conflict issues, behavioral issues with kids at North Star. We have loads of conflict with kids with hard lives for other reasons that we're alluding to outside of North. We don't solve everything, and life is hard for a lot of people, and there's dangers and there's troubles. We deal with a lot of kids with a lot of mental health woes or other behavioral issues. We've had, self-harming. There's a lot of troubles in the world, and we see them and we work on them, but we do not have conflict at North Star about respecting the program and respecting the premises. That's just not an element of my life, and I am fairly certain that community colleges by and large don't have those problems either, even though they deal with a younger ilk, right? And for the most part, colleges, for the most part, other vocational training programs don't have these problems. There is no reason to assume that teens would misbehave if you open up schools and give them a choice and say, the library's open all day, the cafeteria is open all day, as long as you don't become a nuisance in the hallways, disrupting. If you go banging on all the doors, disrupting the classes that are in session, we can't have that, right? So, and we'll ask you to leave. We'll rescind the offer of the free movement, or the free use of this building. So if there's something worthy, people, but hey, it's not that big a deal. It's not even complicated. It's simple.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting stuff. I mean, I'm very sympathetic, and I lean your way, in this whole sphere. But it's always that question of like how it's like, okay, the system we have is really not working. I mean, it's horrific to look at these metal detectors and lockdowns, and I mean, when the George Floyd uprisings were happening here in Los Angeles, it was in the media that I swear to God, it was something like there was like a tank at like the local elementary school. I mean, the amount of militarization of our schools, the fact that like that's not the headline and the focus around education, I mean, there were stories of like third graders being arrested and pepper sprayed, like how that behavior doesn't become like the headline more often is shocking to me. So I think it's really great what you're doing. And I just wish that Michael had access to a center younger. I think that would have been a huge boon. But I think there was a shift of, when he came to Pathfinders of kind of his education and his track kind of formalizing more. So yeah, thank you for chatting with me about, young Michael. And
fun memories. Good
memories. Good. And I'm happy you were able to follow his career and kind of be in touch.
Very impressive.
And thanks for chatting with me. I'm just genuinely curious about education in this country. And, I think I'm still at a point, I don't have kids yet. And so I still have like a little bit of trying to, I think I'm like, still optimistic about reforming the public schools and making them just a better place for everyone. But I don't think that differs per se from your last chapter. I don't know if we'll ever get to that full community college type level of emancipation in my lifetime, but that would be pretty cool if we did.
I hooked you up. Did I not?